G'day everyone, it's Sam. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing if you love free, high quality video content. We have a short video today, just working on the pose downward facing dog. So if you're brand new to the practice, this is a pose that you're going to want to get comfortable in if you're looking to stay with the yoga practice. And if you're an experienced practitioner, it's always good to revisit the foundations every once in a while just for a tune-up. So all you'll need is your yoga mat today, and when you're ready, we'll get right into it. Alrighty, so we're working on the downward facing dog today because it is probably the most prominent yoga pose in the physical practice of yoga asana or postures. Now this is a pose that's probably going to be in every single public class you ever go to in your entire life, and it's one that you're definitely going to want to get familiar with. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate the posture first, and then we'll run through some common mistakes or common problems that people might have when they come into the downward facing dog, and then some alignment tips that may help you feel a little more comfortable in the posture. So I'll get into the shape first. Essentially what it is this inverted V shape. The hips are the highest point of the body, and there's an equal amount of weight running through both hands and both feet. So that is your downward facing dog. Now, it may not look like much, but it is actually quite a tough posture. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of flexion through the shoulder joint. So if you're quite tight through the shoulders, it can be a lot of pressure coming into this space of arms overhead. And it's also quite tough through the back of the legs. The hamstrings, the calves, the Achilles tendons are all getting a deep, deep stretch. So that is your downward facing dog. Now, the way that I like to set up this posture is from a plank pose, because if you're comfortable in a plank pose, then you're able to stand the posture of downward facing dog a little better. So let's set up from a plank pose. Set your hands down so they are underneath your shoulders. Now, when we come back for the downward facing dog, what we want to find is an external rotation in the shoulders. So what that'll look like is the biceps spinning towards the front of the mat and your elbows pointing backwards. Now, very, very commonly you will be taught to have your index finger facing forward, but if that's the case and you're newer to the practice, quite often your elbows can start to spill out towards the sides and the arms can bend. And if that happens, you use a lot more strength than is required when you're in the downward facing dog. So the way that I like to set this posture up is to have your index fingers just facing the top corners of the mat. So now the space between your index finger and your thumb is pointing straight ahead. And that way you can push firm through the inner part of your palm, and the biceps can naturally start to rotate towards the front of the mat a little more. So that external rotation through the shoulders is going to allow you to spread apart your shoulder blades, and that way you're not recruiting too much strength from the upper back and the muscles from the arms as well. So we push through the inner part of the palm, we wrap the biceps towards the front of the room, and then everything that's facing the floor is going to start to resist or move away from the floor. So instead of chest caving towards the earth, we push to create this space between the shoulder blades, and the heart will move towards the ceiling rather than towards the floor. And we'll step our feet back and just come to our plank pose first. So already we're starting to wake up the arms. We're pushing through the inner part of the palm, wrapping the biceps forward, resisting the earth. Now we allow the belly button to start to move in towards the back of the spine there. So once again, everything facing the floor is resisting the floor. And you can start to move very slowly, just forwards and back here on the balls of the feet. So that way the back of the legs will start to warm up and you'll get that stretch through the bottoms of the feet as well. Now the reason I like to set up the downward facing dog from a plank pose rather than from a all fours position, hands and knees, is because this is how long you want your downward facing dog to be. So from a plank pose, that's how long the shape is going to be. So if we were to come into the downward facing dog from here, we'll take a bend into the knees first, push the hips up and back. Now notice I'm keeping my knees bent the entire way and the heels lifting nice and high. And once I get to a point where I feel comfortable, I'll drop the head, so I'm looking back towards my feet.
Now, quite often the heels can start to spin in towards each other and the knees will fall away from each other. So once we get here, we're going to try and counteract that. So we move the heels away from each other so they hide behind the balls of the feet. Nice one. Now again, everything is resisting the earth. So instead of just falling towards the earth, that'll place quite a lot of pressure on the shoulders here. We push through the inner part of the palm, find an element of lift. And with the knees bent and the heels lifting, we're able to tilt the tailbone up towards the sky a little more. So what we're looking for essentially is one long line from our wrists all the way up to our tailbone. The knees can be as bent as you like. So this would be a good starting point for your downward facing dog. And once you get there, generally you're in this pose for a few breaths. So you want to start to move around. You can do the running man, start to pedal out through the feet, straightening one leg, then the next, just seeing what that feels like. And also maybe moving your hips from side to side by pivoting the heels from one side of the mat to the next. So that's going to give you a deep stretch through the lateral sides of your body and also give you a natural range of motion through the body so that when you come to stillness in your downward facing dog, it feels a little more comfortable. So drop the knees down to the mat, sit the hips back towards the heels, just shake out the arms, shake out the wrists. So already, if you're new to the practice, that was a lot of time to spend up in downward facing dog. And quite often in a public class, you're up in the down dog for around 5 breaths every single time you're there. So we can become a lot on the body. So that's why we want to get comfortable in the plank pose first before we come back to the downward facing dog. So now we're going to run through some of the common problems you may have coming into your downward facing dog and how we can work around them. So one of the most common problems is obviously a lack of flexibility in the back of the legs. Now, you may have seen a picture somewhere on the internet of someone doing a downward facing dog with their legs completely flat and their heels planted on the mat. Now, that is not the goal. What's right for somebody else's body is not going to be right for yours necessarily. So rather than trying to slam your heels down towards the earth, keeping your legs locked out, it's far more beneficial to bend the knees, lift the heels to allow the tailbone to tilt up towards the sky. What I mean by that is instead of your spine being rounded, we want to try and flatten out the lower part of the back. So it's an anterior tilt of the pelvis as you allow the tailbone to tilt up towards the sky. And it's far more beneficial to find this straight line of energy from your wrists all the way up to your tailbones rather than having straight legs. So the flexibility in the hamstrings, that takes a while. The hamstrings are very big muscles. So work on getting a straight line from the wrists to the tailbone before you find that straight line from the tailbone down towards the heels. So moral of the story, keep the knees bent. One of the next problems we see quite often is tightness through the shoulders. So lifting the arms up and overhead is not a very easy position to be in, especially if you spend a lot of your day maybe at a desk, maybe on the tools. Your arms are quite often in this position or down here. It's not that often that we spend a lot of our day with arms up and overhead. So this position may be a little bit uncomfortable for you, and it may resemble a little something more like this in your body. So if you're coming up for your downward facing dog, you're keeping the knees bent, the heels lifting nice and high, and you get to here, and already it starts to feel like it's a little too much on the shoulders. Walk your feet in a little bit closer. Make your down dog shorter. Turn those index fingers out so they're pointing towards the top corners of the mat. And here's the kicker. Drop your head. If you're holding on to all this tension in your neck, the traps are starting to flex. You're going to hold all that tension. You're not going to be able to release. So let your head drop first. Look at your toes. Pull your belly in towards your spine. So as you exhale, draw your belly in and notice naturally you have a little more space and you'll be able to find a little more flexion through the shoulders. And then you can work to slowly, in your own time, walk the feet back to a space that feels comfortable for you. So remember, let your head drop. Exhale to draw the belly in and see if you can find a little more flexion through your shoulders.
So if we want to put all those pieces of the puzzle together to find our downward facing dog, this is what it's going to look like, potentially. Remember, I'm just sharing with you what has worked for me in my own practice. You can take some of this if it works for you, but please note that there's no one way to do any posture. You find what works for you, what feels safe, what feels good, and you apply those parts of the practice, and you leave the ones that don't. So we're going to set up in a plank pose, have the index fingers facing the top corners of the mat, push away from the earth, wrap the biceps forward. Now press through the inner part of the palm, step the legs back to your plank pose first. So the heart is moving away from the floor, the belly is pulling in. We'll have the feet about hip width, distance apart, so you can look back just to see what that may look like for you. Now from here to come to downward facing dog, we bend the knees first, guide the tailbone up and back, press the hips towards the sky, allow your head to drop, and look towards your feet. So the ears are in line with the biceps, the neck is nice and long. We spin the heels away from one another so they hide behind the balls of the feet. We exhale to pull the ribs in, pull the belly in, push the tailbone up and back, and then maybe, if there's space, the heels can move a little closer towards the floor. There's an even weight through both hands and both feet. Nice straight line from your wrists to your tailbone. The knees can be bent, the heels can be lifted, or maybe one day the legs work to straighten. As you continue to exhale to pull the ribs in and pull the belly in, that'll give you a little more support through the midsection. And remember, if staying still and stagnant starts to get too much, feel free to pedal it out, to move the hips from side to side, and try and get a little more comfortable in your downward facing dog. So those are some tips that may be able to help you in your downward facing dog. Once again, take the ones that work for you, leave the ones that don't. If you have any questions after this practice, please drop a comment down below. And once again, if you could, please consider subscribing to help grow the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon. Peace.